Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Richard Medcalf about marrying the disciplines of strategy and leadership in the service of our clients. Richard Medcalf, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Jonathan, hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. It's evening there outside of Paris, where you're joining us from, and I'm here in Utah in the morning on the 24th of August. It's great to be with you. I'm always excited to talk with colleagues, thought leaders, consultants, organizational leaders from around the globe. And just yesterday, I had a chance to talk with someone in Prague, and today we get to talk with you outside of Paris. That's wonderful, and I'm excited for our conversation. Today, we're going to be exploring the connection between strategy and leadership and how we can marry the two more effectively in the service of our clients. The reality is that leadership should always be connected to strategy, but I'm not sure that always happens. And so I think as we explore this together, with your tremendous background and expertise, we'll be able to tease out some tips for listeners and what they can do to be more effective with this as they move forward with their own teams. As we get started, I wanted to share Richard's bio with everybody. Richard Medcalf describes himself as what you get if you were to put a McKinsey consultant, a slightly unorthodox pastor, and an entrepreneur into a blender. I love that, by the way. That's tremendous. Richard is an executive coach and leadership consultant to exceptional founders and CEOs and their leadership teams. His clients are elite performers who've already achieved incredible things and still have the ambition to multiply their impact and influence and achieve something that seems impossible right now. After a master's degree at Oxford, where he came top in his year, Richard started his career in a premier strategy consultancy where he rose to become the youngest ever partner. He then spent 11 years at tech giant Cisco, firstly elevating Cisco's relevance in the C-suite of its Fortune 100 customers before being selected for an elite team to catalyze strategic partnerships and new business models. Richard has advised founders and C-level execs for 20 years, from Fortune 100 companies to high growth tech firms. Keen to marry the disciplines of strategy and leadership in service of his clients, he qualified as a senior leadership consultant and executive coach before founding X Quadrant in 2017. Richard is a binational English and French, lives near Paris, and is happily married and the proud father of two. Again, wonderful to have you. Welcome. It's just a pleasure. Anything else you would like to add by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
No, I'm sure by the end of that, everyone's pretty bored with who I am. So we can just dive straight in and get into the meat and serve your audience. That's fine.
Oh, never. You know, I love the conversations that I have on this podcast with so many interesting people around the world. And we always, focus primarily on the topic at hand for the day. I kind of wish I had like a separate podcast just to dive into the history and the stories behind each of these individuals, and yourself included. One of the things I didn't mention in your bio is that you're a pastor. People may have gathered that from the first part of your introduction, the joke about the the blender, but ultimately, I mean, that's amazing. The background and kind of the different pieces that you pull together, I think, just really makes for a compelling narrative around your own career, as well as what you try to do in helping organizations. So anyways, we don't need to go into
perhaps I can give you a bit of some extra color onto that about why I do what I do. It might be helpful. I mean, you did raise good things. I suppose when I was at Cisco, there came a moment when I kind of sat back and thought, what's the legacy that I want to tell my grandchildren about, or great grandchildren or something, right? When I'm 90 and they're on my knee and they're asking me about what I did in my life. And I realized that telling them that I helped increase AT&T's EBITDA margin by 0.5% or whatever was not was not the whole story I wanted to tell them about. I was happy to create results. I'm still happy to create financial results with my clients. That's all good fun and important. It's the fuel for impact and for business and all sorts of things. But I realized that that wasn't the ultimate contribution that I wanted to make. And that was really why I started to look back at what are all the different strands in my life. As I said, one of them was around my own kind of religious convictions, and believing that actually we don't get what we want, we get who we are, and therefore personal transformation has been a thread through my life, through my faith, but also through my desire to be productive and high performing, and way of thinking about how do I create my own results, getting my first at Oxford and getting my career successes and everything else. That was a key thing, and I realized that personal transformation part and professional transformation is really key. If you want to have an impact as a leader, it's not just about what you want to achieve. It's about how you're going to show up to deliver at a new level. What kind of person do you want to be? And my sister's mentally handicapped. My mum died pretty young from cancer, and so I kind of have that deep-seated realization that life is not a rehearsal. We get to do it once, and we owe it to ourselves to kind of really, if we've got the opportunities, to push ourselves, right, and multiply our impact and make a difference. And so that's kind of what motivates me behind all of this. And I think that leadership and strategy, are two of those key components. I mean, I would say the third one is purpose, right? Leadership, strategy, and purpose. When you overlap those on a Venn diagram, in the middle of that, you'll find true impact.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And like you said, personal transformation. Now, however people frame that for themselves, whether you're a spiritual person, a religious person, or not, secular humanists can get behind the idea of personal development, personal transformation. And I think that is a key component to successful leadership, that we foster that within ourselves, and then that we foster that amongst our team. We create an environment where everyone can explore, find their genuine, authentic, personal expression, and go through that transformational process so they can become something truly remarkable and contribute not only back to the firm, but contribute to society as a whole, contribute to their families, contribute in just a lot of meaningful ways. So I appreciate the different types of backgrounds you bring to the table and your approach to leadership. And I do think that's a compelling background. All right. With that said, thank you for that. Let's dive on in a little bit to marrying strategy and leadership. And like you said, purpose is the third leg of the stool, right? You need all three of those pieces together if you're going to drive a sustainable, successful organization. How do you think about the connection between those three? And where do we often fall short in organizations? I mean, it seems obvious. We're talking about it. I'm sure most people listening, and probably most leaders, if you were to poll them, they would say, yes, you need to align strategy and leadership ethics, leadership elements, and you always need to connect that with a why and with a greater purpose. I think most people would say that, they would acknowledge that, yet it often doesn't happen. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, let's kind of try and define a few things here, right? What is strategy and what is leadership, right, for a start? And I suppose I see strategy as a lens. A strategy is a lens that focuses things in to a point. And so it's this analogy like between the sun and the laser, right? You can go out, spend all day under the sun, you might get a nice tan. Whereas and that's how much billions of watts of energy out there in the sun, right? But it's diffuse. Whereas, you get just a few, I don't know, milliwatts of power from a laser because it's so concentrated, it can cut through steel. And so for me, strategy is that applied to our own life and our own mission. It's really filtering out. And I like to say that most people, they don't have a strategy, they have a smategy. And I'm as guilty as anybody. It's easy to chase the shiny objects. It's easy to have too many priorities on the plate. It's a constant discipline to focus in and say, what is the top thing to work on right now? What is going to move the needle? What's the investment? Because strategy is also about investment. Right? So what am I going to invest today? What time, effort, money, whatever am I going to invest to get a reward later on? So when my clients say that they're stuck in, a lot of people say to me, I've got too much, I'm too stuck in operations. I'm not freeing up time for strategy. I work a lot with my clients on that at the start of our work together to help them really level up in what they're focusing on. And often, to do that, they need to be we really need to be looking at what's the investment that you're going to make today that is going to pay off, have the biggest return in the next week, the next month, the next quarter, next year, and really get clear about that. So strategy is a lens. And then leadership, I think, and now I've not got the definition right in front of me, but I'm really coming to realize that what leadership is, it's about releasing, if you like, discretionary effort, right? It's releasing, it's influence. It's a social process of social influence by which we release people to go further than they have to, right? Because they want to. So I think if you're in the realm of if you're not in the realm of leadership, then sure, you can get people to do things. You can deliver tasks, and you can kind of lock down systems to make sure that things are getting done. But I think that you've created leadership when people around you are going above and beyond, right? Where they've bought into the vision.
Yeah, and that's the difference between compliance and commitment in organizations. You can through an authoritarian management style, you can get people to do stuff. You can get them to complete tasks. That's usually some sort of a carrot and stick, fear-based kind of an approach. That's not a particularly sustainable kind of an approach in the long term. Whereas leadership, it's really about fostering commitment. And I like how you termed it social influence, that you're trying to engender commitment, foster commitment, loyalty, and engagement amongst your people to go above and beyond even what you could conceive of. Like the greatest leaders unleash the potential of their people. Right. And if I'm unleashing the potential of my people, that means there's probably hidden potential that I can't even see, right? I can try to see it. I should try to see it. But ultimately I need to create the environment where they feel safe to do that, and where they feel empowered and supported in unleashing their own potential. So I love that contrast that you make there.
Yeah, and it's always goal orientated, right? And I think this is where so leadership isn't just maximizing efforts generically. It's about in achievement of a mission, which perhaps links into purpose. But if you start to think about the relationship between the two, when I'm working with leaders, often they're, many times they're CEOs. That's often be other C-suite leaders on occasion, or, occasionally I'll do programs where there's a more junior set of people. But especially one of the things the CEOs often kind of have to realize is actually, although you're now in the position of ultimate power, and this applies to people who aren't CEOs as well, it's just that it's not quite so extreme, because, the more higher you rise, the more power you get. But at the higher you rise, the more power you have, theoretically, but practically, the less you should use it. And so, because let's say the ultimate case, you're now the CEO, congratulations, you've got the big chair. You can pretty much tell anybody what to do in the company, but every time you do that, you're probably stepping on somebody else's role, somebody else's sphere of influence, responsibility, and that's going to create demotivation, and you're disempowering the person. You're starting to do all the micromanagement and everything else. And so the more you do, the less impact you're going to have on the overall business. And it applies at other levels as well. But so what's the strategic thing to do? Well, it's to set the leadership culture, right? It's to as a CEO, as I like to say to CEOs, well, first of all, let's have a look at what kind of decisions you're making. Well, first of all those functional decisions don't do. That's why you have an executive team. Secondly, all those cross-functional decisions, well, you shouldn't be the judge and arbiter between those people. You should get those people to actually chat together, right, and come up with solutions that they come to you with, perhaps, or come to the rest of the execs with. And so what else is left? Well, what's left is embodying and championing the vision. What's left is taking responsibility for the leadership culture in your organization from your team. So, first of all, managing your team, developing your leadership team, making sure that they're a model of what you want to see in the business, but then also making sure that they also propagate that culture within the other leadership levels in the company. And so I was talking with one client and he was thinking about, well, why do I want to get involved in M&A? Because although that's like the CEO thing to do, it's a big ticket issue. What is it exactly that I'm required to do? And as we had this conversation, his insight was, it's not actually, I don't need to do the finance or legal due diligence. I don't need to do that stuff. It's being done. In a sense, I don't even need to worry exactly about the integration plan. That should be my operation officer's role. What I need to do is safeguard, is this going to work in terms of the vision of the company, in terms of the leadership culture? We're going to bring on very senior leaders into our mix. Are those leaders going to fit in, do they have the right values? All those are the issues which the CEO needs to be focused on. And this applies at other levels in the companies as well, but you can see it perhaps most clearly when you start to focus in on this. So strategy, the higher you rise, becomes less about your own personal projects, and it becomes about how do I create the environment, the greenhouse, if you like, for everything to thrive.
Yeah. I love that. And that is the challenge and the struggle that I think many executives have, whether, really middle management on up. As, people grow in their roles and they move up in their career and they have these increasing responsibilities, it's just so incredibly easy for you to feel like, you're in charge because you are the smartest, the brightest, you are the most capable, you've been the most productive, the most successful in the past. That's why you're in the position you're in, right? And so there's this kind of, whether that's your intention or not, there's this pride and arrogance associated with that I think we actively have to counterbalance in our own personal development, so that we don't drink our own Kool-Aid, right, and fall into the trap of thinking we know best and we have it figured out. Because inevitably what ends up happening is that you end up stepping on the people around you, whether that's your intention or not. You may have the purest intentions of wanting to just help, other people with their work, but like you said, that how it's perceived from those around you is that you're stepping all over them, you're micromanaging them, you're trying to control, you don't trust them, you're not empowering them. And that diminishes your influence, your effectiveness as a leader as a whole.
Absolutely.
And so absolutely, we need to be able, the more responsibility we have, the more influence we have, the higher we are in the hierarchy of the organization, the more we have to let go of power and control, the more we have to rely on our people, rely on the expertise of the people on our team. And like you said, that then leaves the culture, that leaves the kind of broader strategy and purpose, that leaves a focus on the environment to make sure that it's healthy, that it's safe, and that people feel like they're in a position to thrive and go through that transformational process that we talked about earlier. And I've just seen it in so many organizations where I truly believe that most leaders they're not just out for power. Like they're in positions, they want to do well, they want to serve their people, they want to be effective, they don't wake up in the morning thinking, how am I going to exert my power over my people today? They wake up, they get excited to go to work and to drive success for the firm. But we don't know any different. We fall into the trap of pride and arrogance often. We follow the models that we've seen other people present to us that often aren't terribly effective, and then we just perpetuate these, the fallacies and the false thinking, and the poor behaviors that ultimately undermine our own influence, our own ability to effectively lead.
Yeah, I like to say sometimes, stop adding so much value. Right. In other words, you're adding value, and it's because it's in your sweet spot, and it's, you know how to do it. But actually, I've said, by adding value, you're probably undermining commitment in the team, because it's suddenly your baby, it's not their baby. It's better to have a 70% good idea with 100% commitment behind it, rather than 100% good idea with 70% or 50% commitment behind it. And I think the secret for moving from one to the other, because you're right, leaders want to do the best, right? They've got a lot of pressures on them, lots of goals, requirements. I think it's being very specific about, okay, where can I make a different choice? So I was just on the phone with a client an hour ago. He's in a senior role in a multi-billion-dollar telecoms giant at a senior level, and we were talking about her team, and I said, one thing I need to do is develop the team here. We've been talking about it for a long time. We've been working on a lot of projects, but I feel we keep she was talking more culturally, like, we always talk about developing people, we never do it. So I put the question to her, okay, well, enough about the culture. What about you? Well, how are you going to do to develop? What do they need? And we talked about that. And then I said, well, what are you going to do about it? What's the very next opportunity where you have a choice? So what you said you want to empower them, or where can you empower them? What's some one project, one decision you can make where they get to do something, perhaps it's going to stretch them, that you're going to take your hands off the wheel. And we identified it. There was a report during a month, with the senior stakeholders being presented to. It's a great opportunity. Take that opportunity, and we walk through what's the risk in that. What might cause you to put your hands on it again and get involved and mitigate those ideas. But for me, if we're going to find something, if we have a highbrow theory like I want to be an empowering leader, you have to really bring it down to earth immediately and say, where does that hit the ground? What am I going to do next week to put that into practice?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And coming back to something you were saying a few minutes ago, when you were defining strategy. First of all, I really like your definitions that you provided, because they're a little bit different than what we typically hear. And I really like the laser focus analogy, the ability to focus and harness energy, right? I think that's a great way to think about whatever the type of strategy is that we're focusing on. And it's a super common problem. I see it all the time. And I see, again, well-intentioned leaders who may even have a lot of other leadership competencies and capabilities, and they're well liked by their people. They're fostering and engendering commitment and trust and all those positive things. And yet the ability to focus isn't there. And there, 5 years rolling strategic plan, all that kind of stuff, that might be in place. But in practice, what really is happening is chasing the shiny object, chasing the low-hanging fruit, and just kind of shifting from thing to thing to thing, whatever seems to be the path of least resistance. And I get it, because you're chasing results. You want to show and demonstrate that you're adding value, and so it's super easy to fall victim to the shiny object syndrome. But that can really derail us from long-term sustainable success if we're just chasing after, whatever seems to be most convenient.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's where I really want to say there's a difference between operational stuff and strategic stuff. So for me, operations, it's that whirlwind, it's all the things which are drawing us in that we need to get done. And it's important within that to have some priorities around the big contracts we're trying to chase, the big things we're trying to deliver, whatever. But then there's this question about what's the thing which is not going to happen unless you make it happen. And just have one thing, which is what's the biggest thing which would make the biggest difference if we have, what's the capability we want to build that would be the most impactful in the next quarter or the next year or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think when you kind of really focus down into, so I often say just have one strategic project, and that's the one thing that no one's asking you to do, but it's the game changer. I'll give you a really, really, really simple example. When I started at Cisco, obviously it's a big organization, and I was a small fish in a big pond, I guess you'd say at that point. And I finished some client work, and I decided to take a day to kind of distill what we'd learned in this quite cutting edge client engagement, which was all confidential, but kind of extract some insights that could be shared publicly. And no one was asking me to do this. And I remember sitting there pretty much my home office for a day. I'm an extrovert, so I found this quite hard doing it just, in the office, in a room by myself, writing a slide, doing some Excel, doing some analysis, drawing out some kind of generic relationships, some key thoughts, trying to structure my thinking, building the presentation, building an economic model to justify it, etc. And by the end of the day, I was quite worn out, and I thought, why am I doing this? Like, no one's asked for it. This is not advancing my career. No one's like, my boss isn't going to slap me on the back, and no one's going to jump up and down. I'm not shipping it. I'm not going to email it out to anybody this evening. There's all sorts of other things I'm sure I could have done, which might have given me a easier buzz. But I persevered, and I spent another day on it or whatever. I spent a couple of days until I was really like, wow, am I just wasting my time here? But that small piece of work, that extra 2 days of effort, ended up, going viral within Cisco. It was shared with, all sorts of customers around the world. I was invited to customer meetings to present it because it was genuinely new, fresh perspectives that nobody had ever seen before. And that was backed up with real data. But the point, that's a tiny example, but it's quite a nice one because you can just picture it in your head. And, that kind of, very new in Cisco, that kind of put me on the map a little bit. Within that community, because I was like, oh, this is not what we're expecting. This is great. This is kind of, where did this come from? And I often find that when a leader identifies what's the thing that I'm going to champion and drive that people aren't asking of me, but is going to make an impact, then that tends to actually outstrip all the stuff we think we're going to be judged on. Like, of course we've got to get the results this week and this quarter and this year, but are we actually building something else, or are we just delivering the numbers?
Yeah. Excellent example, Richard. This has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate all of your insights and the experience that you shared with listeners. I note the time, and I want to let you get on with your evening there outside of Paris. But before we close, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your business, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Sure. So my business is called X Quadrant. So you can find my business at xquadrant.com. Great place to go if you are, as you said at the start, if you're a leader who is looking to get to another level, that you achieved a lot, you want to get further. If you're a CEO or think like a CEO, there's plenty of resources there. If you're a podcast listener, which you obviously are because you're listening to this, then you might be interested in my podcast called the Impact Multiplier CEO. I do a mixture of sharing my own ideas and also interviewing some impressive tech sector CEOs on what's created their success. So that might be an interesting resource. And the last one is this topic of freeing yourself up for strategic activity is so key. And it's a real pain point for so many people. So I've built a short email course, totally free, and it just takes you through thinking about, well, how am I going to actually get myself out of operations and focused on the strategic things when I've got all these organizational pressures upon me? and I have got results to deliver. And that's got a lot of good feedback. If you're interested, you just go to xquadrant.com/go/productivity, and you can find the details for that there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Richard. It again has been just a pleasure. I really appreciate your time and the knowledge you've shared with listeners today. I hope everyone will reach out, get connected with Richard, find out more about what he and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.
Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.